Chapter 3. The Spouter-Inn. Entering that gable-ended Spouter-Inn, you find yourself in a wide, low, straggling entry with an old-fashioned wainscots, reminding one of the bulwarks of some condemned old craft. On one side hung a very large oil painting, so thoroughly besmoked and every way defaced that in the unequal crosslights by which you viewed it, it was only by diligent study and a series of systematic visits to it and careful inquiry of the neighbors that you could any way arrive at an understanding of its purpose. Such unaccountable masses of shades and shadows that at first you almost thought some ambitious young artist in the time of the New England hags had endeavored to delineate chaos bewitched. But by dint of much and earnest contemplation and oft-repeat ponderings, and especially by throwing open the little window toward the back of the entry, you at last came to the conclusion that such an idea, however wild, might not be altogether unwarranted. But what most puzzled and confounded you was a long, limber, portentous black mass of something hovering in the center of the picture, over three blue, dim, perpendicular lines floating in a nameless yeast. A boggy, soggy, squinchy picture truly enough to drive a nervous man distracted. Yet was there a sort of indefinite, half-obtained, unimaginable sublimity about it that fairly froze you to it, till you involuntarily took an oath with yourself to find out what the marvelous painting meant. Ever and anon a bright, but alas, deceptive idea would dart you through. It's the Black Sea in a midnight gale. It's the unnatural combat of four primal elements. It's a blasted heath. It's a Hyperborean winter scene. It's the breaking up of ice-bound streams of time. It's at last all these fancies yielded to that one portentous something that the pictures midst. That once found out, and all the rest were plain. But stop, does it not bear a slight resemblance to a gigantic fish, even the great Leviathan himself? In fact, the artist's design seemed this, a final theory of my own, partly based upon the aggregated opinions of many aged persons with whom I conversed upon the subject. The picture represents a Cape Horner in a great hurricane, the half-found ship weathering there with its three dismantled masts alone visible, with an exasperated whale purposing to spring clean over the craft, is in the enormous act of impaling himself upon the three mastheads. The opposite wall of this entry was hung all over with a heathenish array of monstrous clubs and spears. Some were thickly set with glittering teeth resembling ivory saws, others were tufted with knots of human hair, and one was sickle-shaped with a vast handle, sweeping round the segment made in the new mossen grass by a long-armed mower. You shuddered as you gazed, and wondered what monstrous cannibal and savage could ever have gone a death-harvesting with such a hacking, horrifying implement. Mixed with these were rusty old whaling lances and harpoons all broken and deformed. Some were storied weapons. With this once a long lance, now wildly elbowed, 50 years ago did Nathan Swain kill 15 whales between a sunrise and a sunset. And that harpoon, so like a corkscrew now, was flung in Javan seas and run away with by a whale, years afterward slain off the Cape of Blanco, the original iron entering nigh the tail, and like a restless needle sojourning in the body of a man, travelled 40 full feet, and at last was found embedded in the hump. Crossing this dusky entry and on through the yon low-arched way, cut through what in old times must have been a great central chimney, with fireplaces all around, you enter the public room. A still duskier place is this, with such low, ponderous beams above, and such old, wrinkled planks beneath, that you would almost fancy you trod some old craft's cockpits, especially of such howling night, when this corner-anchored old ark rocked so furiously. On one side stood a long, low, shelf-like table covered with cracked glass cases, filled with dusty rarities gathered from this wide world's remotest nooks. Projecting from the further angle of the room standing a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head, be that how it may, there stands a vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide a coach might have almost driven beneath it. Within are shabby shelves ranged round with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and then those jaws of swift destruction, like another cursed Jonah, by which name indeed they call him, bustles a little withered old man, who for their money dearly sells the sailors deliriums and death. Uh, abd- Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his poison, though true cylinders within, the villainous green goggle glasses deceitfully tapered downward to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pecked into the glass surround these footpad goblets. Fill to this mark, and your charge is but a penny. Fill to this a penny more, and so on to the full glass, the Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for a shilling. Upon entering the place, I found a number of young seamen gathered about a table, examining by a dim light divers specimens of skim shatter. I sought the landlord, and telling him I desired to be accommodated with a room, received for answer that this house was full, not a bed unoccupied. But avast, he added, tapping his forehead, you hain't no objection to sharing a harpooner's blanket, have ye? I suppose you're goin' a whaling, so you better get used to that sort of thing. I told him that I never liked to sleep two in a bed, that if I should ever do so it would depend upon the harpooner might be, and that if he, the landlord, really had no other place for me, and the harpooner was decidedly objectionable, why rather would wander further about a strange town on so bitter a night. I would put up with half of a decent man's blanket. I thought so. All right, take a seat. Supper? You want supper? Supper will be ready directly. I sat down on an old wooden settle, carved all over like a bench on the battery. At one end a ruminated tar was still further adorning it with his jackknife, stooping over and diligently working away at the space between his legs. He was trying his hand at a ship underneath full sail, but he didn't make that much headway, I thought. At last some 4 or 5 of us were summoned to our meal in an adjoining room. It was cold as Iceland, no fire at all. The landlord said he couldn't afford it. Nothing but 2 dismal tallow candles, each in a winding sheet. We were fain to button up our monkey jackets and hold to our lips cups of scalding tea with our half frozen fingers. But the fare was of the most substantial kind. Not only meat and potatoes, but dumplings. Good heavens, dumplings for supper! One young fellow in a green box coat addressed himself to these dumplings in a most direful manner. My boy, said the landlord, you'll have the nightmare to a dead sartany. Landlord, I whispered, that ain't the harpooner, is it? Oh no, he said, looking a sort of diabolically funny. The harpooner is a dark complexioned chap. He never eats dumplings. He eats nothing but steaks, and he likes 'em rare. The devil he does, says I. Where is that harpooner? Is he here? He'll be here afore long, was the answer. I could not help it. I began to feel suspicious of this dark-complexioned harpooner. At any rate, I made up my mind that if it so turned out that we should sleep together, he must undress and get into bed before I did. Supper over, the company went back to the bar-room, when, knowing not what else to do with myself, I resolved to spend the rest of the evening as a looker-on. Presently a rioting noise was heard without. Starting up, the landlord cried, "That's the Grumpus crew. I seed her reported in the offing this morning. A 4 years' voyage and a full ship. Hurrah, boys! Now we'll have the latest news from the Fijis." A tramping of sea boots was heard in the entry. The door was flung open, and in rolled a wild set of mariners enough, enveloped in their shaggy watch coats, and with their heads muffled in woolen comforters, all bedarned and ragged, and their beards stiff with icicles. They seemed an eruption of bears from Labrador. They just had landed from their boat, and this was the first house they entered. No wonder then that they made a straight wake for the whale's mouth, the bar, when the wrinkled old Jonah, there officiating, soon poured them out brimmers all around. One complained of a bad cold in his head, upon which Jonah mixed him with a pitcher-like potion of gin and molasses, which he swore was a sovereign cure for all colds and catarrhs whatsoever, never mind of how long standing, or whether caught off the coast of Labrador and on the weather side of an ice island. The liquor soon mounted into their heads, as it generally even does even with the arrantest topers newly landed from sea. They began capering about most obstinter, obster, like, streperously. I observed, however, that one of them held somewhat aloof, and though he seemed desirous not to spoil the hilarity of his shipmates with his own sober face, yet upon the whole he refrained from making as much noise as the rest. This man interested me at once, and since the sea gods had ordained that he should soon become my shipmate, though but a sleeping partner one, so far as this narrator is concerned, I here venture upon little description of him. He stood 6 feet in height, with noble shoulders, and a chest like a coffer dam. I seldom seen such brawn in a man. His face was deep brown and burnt, making his white teeth dazzling by contrast, while in the deep shadows of his eyes floated some reminiscence that did not seem to give him much joy. His voice at once announced that he was a Southerner with a fine stature, though I must be one of those tall mountaineers from the Alleghany ridge of Virginia. When the revelry of his companions had mounted to its height, the man slipped away unobserved, and I saw no more of him till he became my comrade on the sea. In a few minutes, however, he was missed by his shipmates, and being, it seems, for some reason a huge favorite with them, they raised a cry of "Bulkington! Bulkington! Where's Bulkington?" and darted out of the house in pursuit of him. It was now about 9 o'clock, and the room seemed almost supernaturally quiet after these orgies. I began to congratulate myself upon a little plan that had occurred to me just previous to the entrance of the seamen. No man prefers to sleep two in a bed. In fact, you would a good deal rather not sleep with your own brother. I don't know how it is, but people like to be private when they are sleeping. And when it comes to sleeping with an unknown stranger in a strange inn in a strange town, and that stranger a harpooner, then your objections indefinitely multiply. Nor was there any earthly reason why I, as a sailor, should sleep two in a bed, more than anybody else, for sailors no more sleep two in a bed at sea than bachelor kings do ashore. To be sure, they all sleep together in one apartment, but you have your own hammock, and cover yourself with your own blanket, and sleep in your own skin. The more I pondered over the harpooner, the more I abominated the thought of sleeping with him. It was fair to presume that being a harpooner, his linen or woolen, as the case might be, would not be the tidiest, certainly none of the finest. I began to twitch all over. Besides, it was getting late, and any decent harpooner ought to be home and going bedwards. Suppose now he should tumble in upon me at midnight. How could I tell from what vile hole he had been coming? Landlord, I've changed my mind about that harpooner. I shan't sleep with him. I'll try the bench here. Just as you please. I'm sorry I can't spare you a tablecloth for a mattress, and that's a plaguey rough board there, feeling the knots and notches. But wait a bit, Scrimshander. I've got a carpenter's plane there in the bar. Wait, I say, I'll make you snug enough. So saying, he procured the plane, and with his old silk handkerchief first dusting the bench, vigorously set to planing away at my bed. And while grinning like an ape, the shavings flew right and left, till at last the plain iron came bump against an indestructible knot. The landlord was near spraining his wrist, and I told him for heaven's sake to quit. The bed was soft enough to suit me, and I did not know how all the planing in the world could have made eater down a pine plank. So gathering up the shavings with another grin, and throwing them into the great stove in the middle of the room, he went about business and left me in a brown study. I now took the measure of the bench, and found that it was a foot too short, but that could be mended with a chair. But it was a foot too narrow, and the other bench in the room was about 4 inches higher than the planed one, so there are no yoking them. I placed them the first bench lengthwise along the only clear space against the wall, leaving a little interval between, for my back to settle down in. But I soon found that there came such a draught of cold air over me from under the sill of the window that this plan would never do at all, especially as another current from the rickety door met the one from the window, and both together formed a series of small whirlwinds in the immediate vicinity of the spot where I had thought to spend the night. The devil fetch that harpooner, thought I, but stop, couldn't I steal a march on him, bolt his door inside, and jump into his bed, not be awakened by the most violent knockings? It seemed not no bad idea, but upon second thoughts I dismissed it, for who could tell but what next morning, should soon I pop out of the room, the harpooner might be standing in the entry all ready to knock me down. Still looking around me again, and seeing no possible chance of spending a sufferable night unless in some person's bed, I began to think that after all I might be cherishing unwarrantable prejudices against this unknown harpooner. Thinks I, I'll wait a while. He must be dropping in before long. I'll have a good look at him then, and perhaps we may become jolly good bedfellows after all. There's no telling. But though the boarders kept coming in by ones, twos, and threes, and going to bed, yet no sign of my harpooner. Landlord, said I, what sort of chap is he? Does he always keep such late hours? It was now hard upon 12 o'clock. The landlord chuckled against his lean cuckle, and seemed to be mightily tickled at something beyond my comprehension. No, he answered, generally he's an early bird, early to bed and early to rise. Yes, he's the bird that catches the worm. But tonight he went out a peddling, you see, and I don't see what on airth keeps him so late, unless maybe he can't sell his head.